So the toy box killer, his real name is David Parker Ray. He was born on November 6, 1939, and he lived in New Mexico. A little bit about like his upbringing. His father was an abusive drunk who treated his wife, David, and David's sister, Peggy, very poorly. Very abusive, controlling, bad, awful, awful, awful. The couple divorced when David was 10, and the three moved to live with grandfather. He had really strict rules, and he expected everyone under the roof to follow them. Failing to follow his rules met with physical, very violent abuse. While his father did not live with them, he visited the family periodically, and when he would visit David, he would give him pornographic magazines, and a lot of them would be pornographic magazines that would show a lot of BDSM, just really intense. There is absolutely 100% nothing wrong with BDSM if you are into it. I am not shaming whatsoever. You are allowed to be into whatever you want sexually. Well, I mean, except for like animals and shit like that. But you get what I'm saying. Like, no judging here, and we're not blaming BDSM on anything. So, okay, never mind, just shut up. So David's mother was reported to like not be around at all. So when they had divorced, the parents, David's mother just kind of disappeared, okay? From what I read, she was an alcoholic and abused drugs, and she just sadly chose that, and she just disappeared. So really, she had no contact with the children and the family at all. So David was also mentally and physically beaten pretty severely by bullies at school, all the way from grade school until he graduated high school. David was really awkward and shy, and it made him a target for bullies. Getting abused at home and then getting abused at school, obviously it did a lot of damage to him. Usually school is somewhere where you can at least escape your shitty home life, and for David it was like he couldn't escape it anywhere. And I just have to say, side note, a lot of the times when I mention these awful killers having a hard upbringing, I see a handful of comments from people suggesting that I'm siding with the bad guy or the killer, or I'm making it more about him or her being a victim. And I just have to say, shut up. Just so you know, I'm not making excuses for them. Personally, like when I read these stories about serial killers and stuff like that, I like to know the full story. I like to see the whole background, where they came from. Did they come from a good family? Did they come from a bad family? Am I saying that if you are abused or anything as a child, you're going to grow up to be a serial killer? Absolutely 100% not. No. For me personally, I just like to get the full story, and I know some of you guys do as well. So that's why I put it in. I am not trying to make this out to be about the serial killer being the victim. I'm just giving the full story. Okay. So during high school, David began to experiment with drugs and alcohol. During this time of abusing drugs and alcohol is when David began to form a fascination with pornography and then the BDSM. He had like a collection that he kept that his dad had given him over time. This was the 50s and 60s. So it was very different. It was just different. I mean, come on, 50s and 60s it seemed like the most judgmental time to be alive. So Peggy, David's sister, she found a bunch of his pornography, the pretty gnarly stuff. He had photos, he had drawings that David had made, and he was 14 at this time. And again, this was in the 50s and 60s, so this was something just way uncommon. And when she found this, it alarmed her, okay? Like, alarmed her. She was probably like, what the fuck? I have to add some humor to this because this story is so heavy, and if I joke around a lot, look, I have to. It's the only way I can get through this one. She never spoke about it until his trial decades later, which we'll get into. She never said anything. On the outside, looking in, David appeared to be making the best of his pretty shitty upbringing. He had joined the army and he received an honorable discharge. And while he was in the army, he worked as a mechanic, and throughout his adult life, he worked as one as well. He was pretty much a mechanic since his teenage years all the way up until his 50s. All of his coworkers and his friends, they would all say he was great at his job. He was always teaching others how to make or fix anything. He was super friendly. He was funny. David, he would weld and he would make his own tools to help him be better at his job. And he was a crafty little man, just like a lot of these killers seem to be, huh? We gotta be keeping an eye out on these crafty ones. So then David, he had married his first wife. I couldn't exactly find an age at which this happened, but he married a lady. David had confided in her that as a teenager, he captured a woman and proceeded to tie her to a tree, and from there tortured and finally killed her. So his first wife, she took it with a grain of salt. She thought he was just suffering from some kind of mental illness, and she really just didn't do anything about it. She would go on to say that he had increasingly disturbing behavior throughout their marriage, and that is eventually what ended their marriage. No idea what this disturbing behavior was. The only thing I could find was that it was disturbing. So I'm not really sure. But the fact, though, that he confided in her about possibly killing somebody, to me, I feel like that would have been like, all right, I'm out.